Hi, I'm David Valdez, and I teach AP Human Geography at Cherry Creek High School in Greenwood Village, Colorado. Today's video will discuss how early hearths of domestication of plants and animals arose in the Fertile Crescent and several other regions around the world, including the Indus River Valley, Southeast Asia, and Central America. What will we learn? Well, agriculture developed in different areas around the world. There are several different agricultural hearths around the world. Different plants and animals were domesticated in each hearth. And plants and animals spread around the world as the result of different types of diffusion over time. Agriculture first diffused regionally. So from the Fertile Crescent, we had crops like wheat, rye, barley, oats, olives, and other crops, and they diffused to northern and eastern Africa, Europe, and the Middle East. From Southeast Asia, we get crops like taro, mango, and coconut, and they diffuse to East India, the East Indies, and India. From the East Asian agricultural hearth, we get rice and soybeans, and they diffused first to Korea and to Japan. From Central America, crops like maize, corn, potato, squash, peppers, and other crops diffused first to North America and then to South America. And from sub-Saharan Africa, we get yams, sorghum, and coffee, and those crops diffuse to Southern Africa. Agriculture diffused globally along trade routes. Increasing patterns of globalizations diffused agriculture around the world. Trade routes across the Eastern Hemisphere diffused plants and animals. Trade routes like the Silk Road brought plants and animals to Central Asia, the Middle East, and to Europe. The Indian Ocean trade brought plants and animals to South Asia, Middle East, and Africa and Europe. The Columbian Exchange happened after the Spanish conquered Mesoamerica and South America. The Spanish then diffused plants and animals to and from the area. Crops like maize, squash, potatoes, and other crops were taken to Europe and planted, while coffee, sugar, horses, cattle, and other animals were brought to the Americas. There were other forms of diffusion later on. Population migration brought different types of cuisines to new areas. As people moved to new countries, they brought new foods and ingredients with them. Immigrants often grew familiar crops from their country of origin on their farms or in their gardens. The Green Revolution spread high-yield varieties of crops across the world in the 20th century. New varieties of plants replaced traditional crops in places like Mexico and India. These countries have seen a big loss in the genetic variety of plants, however. And increasing wealth has raised demand for animal protein. Demand for beef, pork, and chicken has risen as less developed countries get wealthier. And large transnational corporations like McDonald's have brought new foods around the world. Let's practice. Which of the following best explains the diffusion of plants and animals from their hearths of domestication? A. Animals were domesticated before plants and diffused rapidly from their hearths of domestication through contagious diffusion because they were mobile and moved easily from place to place. B. Domesticated plants spread through wind-borne dispersal of seeds from their original hearths, expanding slowly until a vast region was covered with new plants. C. Both domesticated plants and animals spread across the globe through contagious diffusion in early years by farmers and traders, and later by relocation diffusion through European exploration and colonialism. D. The diffusion of plants and animals was limited to areas close to each hearth of domestication because the newly developed plants and animals could not readily adapt to different soil types. Or E. The diffusion of plants and animals was dependent on nomadic traders who traveled between agricultural villages because early farmers were sedentary and did not travel to other areas. The answer is C. What should we take away? Well, agriculture is continuing to diffuse across the world. Plants and animals have diffused from their hearts across the world. The diffusion of plants and animals is so extensive that these ingredients have become integral to cultural cuisines everywhere. It's your job as a geographer to understand the diffusion of plants and animals from their hearths to areas around the world. Thank you.
I'm Kristen Brandt, and today we're going to talk about the second agricultural revolution. Exciting. I can't wait to share this with you. But before we do, let's think about a mental map here. Let's picture an island. Picture one of the most powerful islands in the world. Maybe one that had a particularly powerful navy. Can you picture Big Ben? Parliament? If so, hopefully you ended up in England. Well, we're going to connect that location to the purpose today. What we're going to focus on here are some agricultural advancements and the impacts of the second agricultural revolution. So what are we going to learn? Well, we need to connect this a little bit. So the second agricultural revolution, we're going to talk about it kind of origins starting in Great Britain around the 18th century. No, I'm not going to ask you to memorize dates. We're just trying to get you to contextualize the information here. But the reason we give you the dates, the rough dates, is because there's also this connection to the Industrial Revolution. While the Industrial Revolution started a little bit before, this is going to the second agricultural revolution is going to overlay, and it's the combination of these two things together that are going to revolutionize farming as we know it today. Why there? Well, didn't I tell you they're the most powerful? They were one of the most powerful navies in the world. But really, the why there has to do with the resources. When we look at England, at the United Kingdom, we look at that resource of coal. We also look at the fact that they had ports around the world, and they were bringing resources from around the world back to England. So from there, what do we do with it? And we've got to be able to produce stuff. And so they started in more than just using your hands. And so they started really kind of creating these different types of machines that then also increased the demand for more resources. And so we needed people to work not only in these factories, but we needed our farms to produce more quicker. So we're going to look at some agricultural advancements. Now, I really want to be clear. It's not necessarily memorizing the concept of the steel plow. It's memorizing, and that's even a horrible word, but it's realizing why these advancements helped to really move our farming and our agricultural practices forward. And so what we're going to do is we're going to look at an image from an original image to where we are today. So for example, the steel plow. I mean, take a look at this. Can you picture a person, typically a man at that time, walking behind holding the steel plow? And typically it was hooked up to an oxen, maybe a horse. And the purpose here was to cut through that root system. The Great Plains, the North European plains, the interior plains had these extensive root systems. If your mom's ever made you pull weeds, you know what those root systems can be like. If you had to do all that by hand or using a hoe, it's going to be really difficult. So when the steel plow came about, it allowed us to clear more land even quicker than we'd ever done before. Today, we're going to use big machines. And so take a look at the discs on this machine as this plow is going to be able to turn and till this land so that it's ready for the next year. It allows us to clear even more without having to use our hands. So we clear the land, we plant the seeds, which we're going to talk about in a second, but we also need to be able to harvest our crops. And so this was a huge shift. Take a look at this McCormick Reaper. Notice the grid-like feature. We're going to come back to that grid-like feature. And I guess full disclosure, if any of you tuned into 5.2, you'll know why that grid-like feature is going to be important. But the reason I point this out, take a look at the horse, take a look at the men working in the field, but also the structure behind it as we're harvesting our crops. That's going to allow us to bring in more goods at one time. Today, take a look at this machine. Look at how wide it is. Take a look at the rows of corn or wheat, or but the grains or millet that we're able to then gather at one time. How did we get the seeds there? It used to be by this. If you've ever had to dig a hole or anything, it can be a lot of work. So when the seed drill was invented, it revolutionized our ability to plant even more at one time. Today, take a look at this. We can put a ton of seeds. We can move it with the tractor. One person is riding along in the tractor and we're planting as we go. Today, we're even using tools such as GPS and GIS to help us to even know what type of seed, where do we plant it, when do we plant it. More to come on future AP Daily videos about that. So we plant our crops, we clear our land, we harvest our crops. Where do we store them? Today we store them in grain elevators, but around the second agricultural revolution, we even came up with better methods to store our goods so that they were able to last longer. Today, these are scattered across the landscape in our rural communities where we can store vast amount of our materials. But let's dig in just a little bit deeper. Why does all of that matter? Well, it matters because it helped us to increase food production. Think about it. I can plant more seeds now. I can harvest more. I can store it longer. So take a look down at the 1850s, and as we're moving towards 2014, how that steadily grows. It's because of those advancements. We can even see that shift from early advancements to highly mechanized advancements. But wait a second, we're even producing more. Where are all those people coming from? Where are they all going to go? And here's what I mean by that. Notice those early images. We're using horses or oxen to help move the tools through the field. I don't need as many people digging by hand, clearing by hand, harvesting by hand. Well, that's where the beauty of the Industrial Revolution kind of coincides here. Those factories need more people working. And so we see this shift as we're producing more, we're storing more. We see this shift where we see more people moving into work in the factories and people being able to use the machines on the land. Here's the other beautiful thing. Because we're able to produce more, people have better access to food, which means our caloric intake increased pretty rapidly. Take a look at the line here starting in 1705 and take a look at this J curve, right? For a while you might think it's exponential. We'll come back to that later on as well. But what we're seeing here is that all of a sudden people had more access to that food. Why is that important? It impacts life expectancy. A steady source of food helps you to fight off so many different diseases. And so if we take a look here, take a look at when we look at these revolutions and how having access to more food, having access to more calories on a daily basis allows people to live longer. So let's practice. Remember that grid light structure that I told you I might have referenced in 5.2? Here it is again. And so when we look at this farmland, okay, so these technologies that were invented during this period is divided into and cultivated as this image that you're seeing to the left. Well, the answer, just so you know, because we've been talking about the second agricultural revolution throughout this time, but really it's those land surveying technology combined with the mechanical plows that helped us create that grid light structure that we see come out of the second agricultural revolution. So what should we take away from today's lesson? Well, today we focused on the second agricultural revolution and those advancements in agriculture. While I don't need you to memorize each one of those advancements, I need you to understand that the mechanization of agriculture helped to increase food production. That increase in food production helped to increase our caloric intake, which helped to increase our life expectancy. But the more we became mechanized, the more that it changed our demand for manual labor. Luckily, the Industrial Revolution was occurring around roughly the same time and allowed for people to shift from the farms into those factories. So why is that all that important? Well, the reality is this revolution in particular helped to really demonstrate and increase the gap between the core and periphery countries. It takes money. It takes money to have those types of technologies. It takes money to have access to all of those goods and services. And this really helped to differentiate between how quickly those core countries were moving forward and really how far behind those periphery countries were. So while you talked about those core and periphery countries with Wallerstein's model in a previous unit, we're going to further look at development in future units. I really hope you continue to join in to these daily lessons, and I want to thank you for tuning in today. Have a great one. Bye.
Hi, I'm David Valdez, and I teach AP Human Geography at Cherry Creek High School in Greenwood Village, Colorado. Today's video will discuss how the Green Revolution was characterized in agriculture by the use of high-yield seeds, increased use of chemicals, and mechanized farming. What will we learn? Well, the Green Revolution created new methods of agriculture. It was a movement that diffused modern agriculture farming methods to developing countries after the mid-20th century. The Green Revolution created higher yield plants using hybridization and genetically modified organisms, also known as GMOs. The Green Revolution diffused chemical pesticides, herbicides, and fertilizers. And the Green Revolution made great use of agricultural machinery and modern agricultural methods. The Green Revolution changed plants. Hybridization and GMOs resulted in higher yields. Hybrid plants are bred to have superior characteristics. One example is a strain of rice known as IR36. It became the most planted strain of rice in the world. And that's because it's resistant to various types of insects. It also has a short growing season, which allows for farmers to double crop, which means that they can grow 2 crops in 1 year. Many different hybrid plants have been created to change varieties of food, including fruits, vegetables, and all other types of plants. GMOs change the genes of a plant. They allow plants to have characteristics that you can't get through hybridization. Most modern corn, soybeans, and cotton grown in the United States are GMOs, and they're resistant to pesticides. The Green Revolution introduced chemicals to crops. The chemical pesticides and herbicides and the fertilizers increase the crop yield. Pesticides keep insects from destroying crops. Chemical sprays on crops kill a variety of insects on the food crops to make sure that the yield is increased. Herbicides target weeds and other invasive plants in the field. Roundup Ready GMO crops control much of the U.S. market. Roundup Ready crops are crops that are resistant to herbicide, the herbicide Roundup, and allows them to grow. Chemical nitrogen and phosphate help plants grow faster. These chemical fertilizers are often more effective than natural fertilizers. The Green Revolution also brought new farming methods. Machinery, irrigation methods, and transportation made food more global. The new machinery helped with the planting and harvesting of crops. It made planting and harvesting much faster and used a lot less labor. The need for human labor decreased dramatically because of this. Irrigation methods changed. The use of water became more efficient and sustainable, so instead of using flood irrigation, where farmers would flood the crop, they used more center pivot irrigation and drip irrigation as well in order to save water. And advances in transportation made it easier to get crops to the global market. This means that farmers got new markets in which they could sell their crops. Here are some positive and negative effects of the Green Revolution. Positive effects include higher yields that result in less starvation, lower death rates, and growing population in developing countries, since now they finally had enough to eat. Countries like Mexico and India became exporters of food instead of importers of food. And increased production brought lower prices for food globally. Also, in the developed countries, money and profits increased for universities and agricultural companies that developed these new methods. The negative effects include things like capital-intensive farming methods, which led to the consolidation of factory farms and the loss of family farms. People working on family farms often had to move to cities for jobs. More machinery meant that fewer women worked in agriculture, and their role was further marginalized. Negative environmental effects such as soil depletion, soil erosion, algae blooms, bee die-off, desertification, and more are also the result of Green Revolution practices. And finally, not all regions or countries were included. Africa, for example, still lags far behind in agricultural production. Let's practice. Between 1950 and 1990, wheat production in India, in average pounds per acre, more than tripled, which allowed India to meet its population's need for food. Which of the following best explains this change? A, the elimination of poverty in India's rural regions. B, the use of genetically modified seeds. C, the increase in microloan programs that provide farmers with credit. D, the use of large farm tractors and combine harvesters. Or E, the use of improved plant hybrids and agricultural chemicals. The answer is E, the use of improved plant hybrids and agricultural chemicals. What should we take away? Well, the Green Revolution changed global agriculture. The new methods that were developed resulted in greater food security and less starvation globally. The Green Revolution has many different positive and negative effects on the environment and humans. And you need to remember that it's your job as a geographer to understand the short-term and long-term effects of the Green Revolution on the world. Thank you.